Hey, it's great to be here on IoT Day. Wow, this has been going on for a long time. Thank you, Rob, for making this happen. Gosh, I've been doing IoT since I was a baby, which was just a decade ago, I guess. I don't know. No, since the 90s, since I created IoT with Al Gore back in the early 1990s, doing vending machines. And now we're just still at it, still, things change dynamically year to year. Is IoT hot? Is it dying? Is it what's going on? What do we use it for? And I think there's a lot of great trends to dive into this year because I think behind the scenes, IoT is probably as relevant as ever, even if it's not the hot, sexy new thing anymore. I don't know. What do you think, Mirko?
Yes, as well. Awesome and great to be here at the IoT Day and that it's still called IoT Day and not Cyber Physical Systems Day or
Yeah,
AI on whatever day. No, it's still
that's
the
right.
Internet of Things because that's what it is. And yeah, as you, a long time in the industry. And yeah, I think it's if you look like the IoT in the Gartner hype cycle, it's over the hype, it's over the top.
Yeah.
But now, as we see, I mean, this is part of daily business.
It feels like for the last few years, we've been swimming in Gartner's trough of disillusionment.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of consolidation of pure IoT companies. We've seen a lot of them disappear. A lot of the big players, there's been lots of news almost every year now of large players who invested a lot of money into that stuff, kind of getting out of that business. And yet, when I think about it, if you think about today, what's the hottest thing in the world right now? It's AI. That's every other minute, every word I hear is AI, AI, generative AI. Is it going to take over the planet? All that stuff. But I'm reminded that without data, AI doesn't work. And that data now, so far, a lot of the, chat GBT and things like that have gotten its data by scraping the internet. But the other half of that equation is IoT. That's where all the data is going to be to train these AI models. And so while it may seem more like boring plumbing, it's still as relevant as ever because we're not going to get the value from AI without the data that we get from IoT. That's kind of where I'm thinking these days. And of course, it needs to be secure, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it needs to be secure. And what is remarkable as well, like we are on our evangelism towards cybersecurity and IoT since decades, really since decades, because I mean, everybody knows this old joke, the S in IoT stands for security. Nothing has changed, but what has changed is that first time in this tech industry, we see a significant change because the regulators have now really taken huge step to maybe put lashes on the industry. Let's say it in that way. I mean,
you're right.
Which where I'm on the one side I'm really unhappy because it was like when we were building IoT, it was the time of the innocent, hey, building tech and great, of course, let's keep security in mind. Yes, we already did encryption, but it was more innocent. But of course, with all the cyber attacks, with all these botnets out there, with all this economic and social impacts, this is no more an innocent industry. If you're building unsecure products, you are really not taking the responsibility to build really secure and sometimes safe application, because I mean it's people's life maybe related to it, like smoke detectors, connected smoke detectors. I mean it's
right. No, you're so right. It's interesting because over time it was like, if we had security in our platforms and technology, we were doing it because we thought it was the right thing to do. You're right. We were innocent. We were naive. But now you have government regulations coming from the EU, I know in the US, like most things, it starts in California.
Yes, US,
Yeah,
China, take in
China.
mind, China,
Who knew?
yeah, who knew? I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
so,
right. And so now there's regulations that you have to follow. Um, you know, I don't know about you. I've seen over time, I feel like we've done a good job building the platforms, the SDK back to ingesting data, encrypting at rest and motion. Obviously, a few years ago, we started hearing the term zero trust as a different way of thinking about security, a different principle, like never thinking that once it's inside your castle, that it's okay for it to do whatever it wants to do. Inside the moat, you're always re-authenticating, you're always now trusting. Um, but yeah, now it's I still feel like the weak link is the device still most times. I don't know what you see. When I see hack attacks, the devices are the ones with the default passwords, no encryption on the device. We tell our customers, if the device has to have some kind of security key or token, or maybe it's an X509 certificate or whatever, we're always saying, oh, well, make sure you use TPM and store the credentials and hardware. We say that, but the real world doesn't really work like that. People are like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have TPM chips. We're just trying to deploy something. And so they take shortcuts, and because they want to get value quickly. And I don't know. I don't know what the right answer to help solve that, well, it's because how outside of IoT, in fact, just in IT over the years, there's always been that tension between the security guys and the people trying to innovate and build solutions for customers or people inside the company. And the security guys were always like saying no every time, and they would lock things down so much that sometimes you're like, what's the value? You guys are locking it down so hard, it's almost not usable. And so trying to find something in the middle, and I feel like IoT lives in that world too.
but it's nothing like the IoT is trapped like the whole software industry. There's to me, it's towards security, it's always the same problem. The problem is economics,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's knowledge, and
Right.
it's as well convenience and usability. So I mean, choosing a password 0000 is sometimes a human convenience decision, and as well not being conscious enough about security. But the economics are still, I think this is still a driver for unsecure products. However, this is my hope that regulation will, let's say, be helpful, because regulation will help that some companies will not have a competitive advantage with their pricing models anymore, because they just save the money on a TPM chip, let's say it in that way. And if we talk about IoT, we are talking always about large scale. Of course, you can say, well, build in the TPM chip, but if this costs you $1 more per device, and we're talking about 1 million devices, it's rather clear that maybe some management people will say, well, take the million.
Yeah, that's a good point. Economics plays a huge role in all this. It's almost like we have to find a way to do security, assuming that the customer is going to make all the wrong choices, and still help save them. They're going to make choices based on economics. They're going to make choices based on convenience, what's easy for them. Because there's no shortage of documentation and videos and things on the internet telling people the right thing to do. But you know how people are. They don't always want to do the right thing.
I've read that the FCC is planning to introduce a label for smart products. It will be a voluntary label, security label. Let's say I don't believe so much in voluntary schemes.
Right.
So if you're an IoT vendor and you're bringing your product to the US market, you can put on a voluntary maybe label indicating the security of the product.
Yeah.
Maybe it will help some who take really care that consumers will pick the right products from the shelf. Maybe,
Right.
okay, it's better than nothing.
So what do you think when you're doing the security technology that you build at your company, you know, what's the high level talking points around what you guys do for
At the moment,
customers?
it's at the moment, like what we're doing with Ashwin, we are very, very intensively looking in the situation, how to help customers to identify the risks during the life cycle on large fleets. I mean, even if regulation is stepping in, we are talking maybe about 3 years or 5 years on patch and update management support, which
Yeah.
is fine for consumer goods, but for industrial products, 3 or 5 years is nothing. I mean,
Right.
they are
Yeah.
often run 10 years, 15 years. So it means that a lot of products will run out of software maintenance. So they will have potential risks.
Right.
Um,
Right. That's a good point.
and how can that customers deal with them? Because at the end, it's always about economics. So they need to make the right investment decisions where they need to, for example, completely change the hardware because you have no ability to secure it anymore.
Hmm.
Or do you invest in isolating or monitoring? I mean, this is all economical questions.
Yeah.
You don't want to make a separate segment, network segment, because you have to invest in routers and licenses and support.
Right.
What's the better strategy? Replacing products, putting them in segments, putting
Yeah.
monitoring on it, taking the risk. That's
Yeah.
also could also be a strategy. However, so
I think
that's
most
where,
people take the risk.
yeah, but because they are not aware about the risk. I mean, it's like,
Right.
to me, this type of risk is like radiation. I mean, nobody's feeling it.
Yeah.
It's there, but you're not feeling radiation. However, if it's getting dangerous, you will feel the impact of radiation, like if you lose your hair or your teeth, or
Yeah.
and that's the same for cybersecurity and the IoT. I mean, usually, if you're a bad guy, you don't have to intend to tear down the network, the company network. I will use the devices as an infrastructure. I mean, that's what we have learned with the Mirai botnet.
Yes. Yes. That's right. Yeah.
It was abusing the infrastructure.
Absolutely. It was, I'm just feeling lucky that I still have my hair and teeth after all the radiation. I used to literally sleep in between missile tubes, ICBM tubes on a Trident submarine
Yeah.
a lifetime ago when I was much younger. But yeah, back in the missile house part of the submarine where there's the 24 ICBMs, they actually put the beds, the bunk beds, like 3 high, like 9-man little staterooms, as they would call it, but they're in between the missile silos on the submarine. And so it is kind of a weird feeling. It's probably why I'm a little bit crazy, I think, today. Maybe it could be.
Yeah, but at the end, I mean, it would be different, isn't it, if you could see the radiation, like if there would be
Yes.
an indicator or whatever. So
Yeah.
the only reason why they had done this is because they were totally aware that the
Right.
crew
Yeah.
will
I mean,
adopt to it. Let's say yeah.
we would have a little IoT device called a dosimeter that would
Yeah.
be that we would wear on our belt.
Yeah.
That would measure rads and stuff like that over time. Yeah. And so, but yeah, it's pretty safe. Fingers crossed. Anyway, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, here we are, 2024 IoT. We've lost some of the biggest hyperscaler players over the last several years. We still have some of the really good IoT platforms out there that I like, that didn't necessarily get acquired by a giant hyperscale cloud, and they're still going. Some of them are going strong. Some of them are struggling. I always just sit back and try to wonder what's the best way to help them. What's the best? What's the secret? You know, it's economics. Is it making it super easy to deploy is so many platforms required people to write so much code over the years that people would go, I might as well just build my own if I'm gonna have to write all this code to do something with your platform. We've seen these no code, low code platforms that are trying to help. I don't know. I mean, we've all been in this game a long time, and you're always trying to look back and see what works and what doesn't work for the best value.
Yeah. What's super interesting is because if you look at the platform market, isn't it like 10 years ago, there was this big hype, like everybody's getting rich by building an IoT platform, and yet this huge competition, companies stepping in. Obviously, the broad business models were not working. That's what I see. It's like, I think like even the huge cloud hyperscalers don't take it as a serious business model anymore.
Yeah,
we're seeing industrial IoT platforms failing and failing. I mean, like from the major big industrial companies of the world, isn't it? And
you're right.
Because customers don't accept vendor logins or have other ideas or being scared or whatever. Or maybe they said, well, it's not so complicated to build an IoT platform if you have open source tools out there. I mean,
that might be a good reason why. It's very common. I'd see over the years, different IoT platform players, they would write some blog post or an article that says, build versus buy, should you, and they would, of course, it's very self-serving, that they would talk about how hard it is for you to build your own platform and you should just use ours and that kind of stuff. Every one of them did that. But I think you're onto something. I've often thought the easy part of IoT was the platform and the cloud stuff. It's just APIs and some security keys and databases and maybe some message queues and then do some analytics. That's stuff a lot of people know. A lot of these IoT platforms are just glorified middleware that we've done 100 times or 1,000 times in software projects.
Yeah,
I think the device part, the embedded software, is hard. A lot of people don't know how to do that.
Exactly. This is hard, and the maintenance of the devices in the field. Like if you come to many cases I had in the past, it was not about, well, the IoT platform we can do. I mean, this is a software part, but how to maintain millions of devices in the field. And this is as well an economic question.
Yeah.
Like how to replace them, how to identify malfunction devices, stolen or just
right.
I mean, you had been in agriculture. I mean, this is a super harsh environment.
Yes, that's true.
So how to keep the systems in a reliable, functional way? I think, and this is far beyond software.
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember thinking doing that agriculture stuff that we needed, and we may have talked about this before, a whole new type of IoT system integrator type company. And I'm not talking about the big consulting firms who decided to create an IoT division inside their big consulting firm, but people literally boots on the ground who, how we talk about there's people going to university and there's people doing trades like welding, electricians, plumber, those kind of jobs. I think there's something in that category for a type of IoT skill that's out there at large scale, because you're right, devices are being stolen, they're failing. If you have 1 million devices deployed, you should assume some percentage of them are failing every day. Just like the hyperscale clouds, they build that knowing that servers are failing all the time. And so a group, I don't know. I mean, part of it, you need to monitor the devices as best you can with your software to look for those anomalies. But also a whole group of people who, they're not programmers, they're not sitting in an office doing something cool. They're out there doing the hard work in the field, replacing batteries, fixing broken devices, up, stuff like that. I don't know if I don't know if there's organizations like that. Maybe there are. I don't know.
Yeah, but investors don't like it. I mean, investors
That's
like
true.
platforms. It's very simple. How many subscriptions do you have? What's the model per device, and so on. Investors like it. But if you go out there and you say, well, I'm the major IoT maintenance company, they will ask you, does it scale?
No.
What is your revenue? No. Nobody likes it.
That's true. So we're stuck in this position where we actually need something like that, but it's not sexy. It's not going to have big multiples in valuation. It's maintenance. It's a bunch of maintenance guys, but it's for IoT. And so I feel like it's something we need, but you're right. Investors don't think that's sexy. But it could be a good small business, maybe, for somebody. I don't know.
You should put AI on it. We're doing that with AI.
There you go.
Our robots.
That's right. Right. That's a good point. Just throw AI on it. 5 years ago, we were going to throw blockchain on it. Now we're going to do AI. It's amazing to me, if you see where have you noticed the boom in new data centers being built and edge data centers being built to train AI models and do inferencing? It's pretty crazy. I used to think wrongly that because of Azure and AWS and GCP and all these hyperscalers that the data center market was going to die. But it turns out the opposite has been true. People are building data centers as fast as they can, filling them full of servers, and they're all training AI models, which is pretty interesting. And we've talked about edge in the context of IoT for years, but now I see people using the term edge, just to mean maybe a micro data center or a small, half rack of servers. Or I know those guys in Austin, Vapor.io, they take a whole shipping container and just drop it in the city, and it's full of servers, and they plug in fiber optics and do low latency compute that way. But it's interesting, a lot of the money is being spent on this compute to train AI models. A lot of electricity is being used, a lot of water is being used. I don't know. It seems like the big phenomenon that I've noticed in the last year or so. And we read articles about it. I read articles about cities like Phoenix, Arizona, which is basically a city that we built in the desert. But they've got all these fab plants down there, data centers and stuff like that. And they talk about all the water. There's already not enough water for the people, and they're sucking it dry. But IoT's got to play such a big role in being that pipeline of data to that stuff. You said AI, and so I have to show you. Let me see if I got the picture on my phone here. I had how we can use DALL-E and all the other different types of AI tools to create nice little pictures. So here's a picture I created, the way I think of IoT. I said,
nice. Yeah.
Basically, give me something that looks like a natural gas pipeline, but it's data from IoT to feed AI and everything else. It's all about AI. Oh, good times.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But as you, it's like, I mean, at the end, isn't it in this kind of technology evolution? I mean, it puts layer on top of layers on top of layers, and maybe the IoT is more now. I mean, this is the huge basement you need, and even like building that basement, because this is the data feed engine for all the other layers coming on top, and at the end, of course, the AI layers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's true. You know, there's that other area of IoT that's just all the people who are in the connectivity space, whether it's LoRa, WAN, and cellular and 5G, and I hear about RedCap as a new 5G thing. There's somebody I see from Deutschland all the time talking about MIOT.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
What is that? What is that technology? You know what it is? Is it's just
Yes, I mean, because I had just a discussion over the weekend about this,
okay?
and okay. First of all, it has been invented or developed by the Fraunhofer, the same Fraunhofer Institute who has invented the MP3. And I think this is as well, I mean, this is their core competence, but however, this is maybe as well one of the biggest weakness, because I think some people believe that they can put in the same success story in terms of licensing
Right.
towards the technology. And I think this time that the times are completely different. So what is the technology? It's one of this low power, large range protocols. Let's
Yeah.
say I would put it in the same category like LoRa or NB-IoT, but they're using a very specific way how to split the telegrams over different spectrums of the band to get more resilient, maybe towards distortion.
Yeah.
I mean, what you have like but however, I think let's have a look if it will succeed. I believe that with this hardcore old school license models, you will not succeed in the IoT world, because it's, I mean, as we said, it's all about economics and it's
Yeah.
about scaling, and you can't put 20 cents per device as a license in IoT. I
Right.
think it's not scaling, because companies are just will ask, well, I mean, economics is already hard in IoT, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. It is.
maybe
It is.
companies that just want to do a measuring, a measure business. Their real business is doing measurement of whatever data or
Yeah.
collecting data and then putting. I mean, their business is, however, business upon data. The devices are just needed to enable that business. But
Yes.
I mean, the devices itself are normally just an investment, and you need to maintain them.
Yeah. Right.
Beside consumer goods, where companies are selling devices, but however, we see that the business models are as well hard in IoT. So I
Yeah.
believe at the end, in most cases, from economic reasons, the ones will win who have the best economic ratio between operational stability, low maintenance, and maybe security. I mean, that's
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting, you know, when we talk about the economics of large scale deployments of IoT devices, and we think about every penny, everything counts, every cent in the device itself, the sensors, the connectivity cost, that because everybody has their hand out, everybody wants to get paid along that value chain.
Yeah.
And so trying to keep that cost down. And so I always, you know, I remember trying to figure out pricing when we were at Azure IoT, you know, how many messages per day for this usage model, you know, and that's going to cost how many pennies or whatever, because our mentality was there's going to be tens of millions of devices connected, and so that cost has got to be low. But then here's the interesting thing. I know some other people who are in the IoT space, not the same way we are. They're more device centric. They don't even talk about platforms. I know somebody who goes to restaurants and hospitality hotels, and he sells $99 a month for basically two temperature devices, like for a restaurant, one for a freezer and one for a walk-in cooler. And the whole value prop is someone, you know, you could lose all the food if someone left the door open and it got warm and stuff like that. And he's having great success. And I remember the first time he told me He's charging $99 a month for this device. I'm like, that's insane. No one would ever charge that much money. And yet, the way he approaches the business, it's working for him. He never even talks about a platform. He's just like, yeah, you just get a SMS. You just get, if there's a problem, because it turns out, remember everybody built all these cool platforms with dashboards and all this stuff? It turns out nobody sits there and stares at dashboards all day. It's kind of like manufacturing, like report by exception. I don't, just tell me if something's wrong. I know another guy who's doing not necessarily agriculture, but ranches like cattle, and he's having success with just a simple device that's measuring how much water is in a trough out on your ranch for your livestock. And he's like, $1 a day, and you get to, everything's good. And people are buying it. I think as soon as you stop talking about crazy scale, and maybe you say, think of this device as a person that would have to, if it's a giant ranch out in West Texas and they're in a pickup truck having to drive, so many miles every day to go check on water levels, for their livestock. What does that cost? What is that fully loaded cost of that person? And that's how we've talked about that forever in IoT. The most simple part of IoT is just remote monitoring. It's a replacement for a human doing an inspection, of having their eyeballs look at something, reading a meter in a factory or whatever. And so I think sometimes if you're not thinking big scale and you just say, what are you using now? How much does it cost you to go visually inspect or find out this stuff, and associate it, with an employee, something like that, and have them think about it in terms of that. Maybe that helps. I don't know, because it does seem like when you're talking about, it seems like a race to the bottom sometimes with the low cost devices, low cost everything, and thinking that no one's going to use it unless it costs almost nothing because of giant scale. But it turns out there's lots of customers who don't need giant scale. They just need a few things. I'm just rambling.
No, and very specific, let's say it in that way. It's like, because I think one misperception in the IoT was when I think it was as well Gartner, isn't it, who put the billion figure at the beginning of the hype cycle. Like when there was the hype cycle, I think everybody was just taking the Gartner numbers, like there will be, I don't know how much billion it was. It was insane. And then it was not going like that, because markets are more complicated, and you see, well, and I think we had as well a discussion, what is an IoT device, like where it starts, where it ends. And I mean, is there is there a smartphone an IoT device? Good.
Yeah, right.
Because today it does everything, but you're not using it to make phone calls, isn't it?
That's right. That's a good point. Yeah.
All the smartwatches and so on. I mean,
yeah.
Every new car sold is an IoT device.
Yeah, it's true. You're right. It's kind of interesting when you think about it that way, because sometimes we feel like IoT is not succeeding the way we thought it was, but maybe it quietly is winning the war in a giant way, because all these everyday things like cars and watches and little Ring alarm, on their front doorbell, and the Amazon, and things. It turns out they're everywhere, and it's all kind of IoT stuff. And it just kind of quietly succeeded,
Look, there's one topic I would like to discuss, because I know you are now more as well in the sustainability topics within more in the industry, how to improve the sustainability based upon IoT. And I'm, as a cybersecurity guy, I'm a little bit more concerned about the sustainability of devices. Like, how do we get a well balance? Like, what I see since decades that the industry is telling us, IoT is a key beneficial technology to improve sustainability. And then I say, well, that's a nice thesis, But now it comes to me and I say, well, look, the life cycle of products are getting much shorter. This is what we see, like 3 years or 5 years life cycle because you can't secure the devices anymore, or less ability to repair because the cybersecurity with binding hardware to software certificates will make it unable to repair anymore.
Right.
What is your opinion about IoT? So I mean, now let's make it very easy. Good or bad? I mean,
yeah. So when I think about using IoT for sustainability, and you said the word earlier, measure. That's what IoT does in its simplest form with sensors. It's measuring something in the real world. It's I know we think we're monitoring or we're doing all this advanced stuff, but at the beginning, it's just measuring, what's the temperature? What's the humidity? What's the vibration on this machine in my factory? It's just doing a measurement and it's transmitting that measurement, taking an analog reading and turning it to digital and sending it to some platform where we can analyze it and do something about it. And so when you think about sustainability, and not necessarily the sustainability of the device itself, but just helping with sustainability, the first thing you have to do to create a baseline, how much CO2 am I emitting? How much methane am I emitting? That kind of sustainability, which is a different thing, like we've talked about in the past, I've written a bunch of stuff about how can we use IoT across those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's hunger, it's climate change, it's the ocean, all these different things, forests. And so you're like, well, how can IoT play a role? Well, a lot of that, it's measuring, it's early warning, we've talked about so many of these use cases over the years, and not everybody's done them, and so it's like, yes, I've got IoT listening devices in the Amazon rainforest listening for a chainsaw. Stop. Or I've got, so like the conference that I was just at in Houston, Texas, all the giant oil companies are headquartered in Houston. And we're talking about how do they become more sustainable, which I know some people will laugh about that and like, they don't care. But it's like measuring methane and CO2 releases at different aspects of where they're drilling for oil or transporting it or a refinery, things like that. And so it all starts with measurement. I'm measuring, I talk to these guys literally who are in the oil business, and the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States says you have to go out and visit your drilling rigs, 4 times a year. And so somebody is in a pickup truck driving to all these places, and they take manually a reading of methane, like parts per million of methane and CO2, and they write it on a note, a clipboard, and then they go report it in and stuff like that. And I talked to a guy, he said, I have to go, he's a small oil company, but he has to visit 400 drilling sites 4 times a year. And he says that's costing my company $35 million a year just to meet that requirement for the government. It's almost like they think of it as a tax. And you can imagine all of us sitting on this call right now. It's like, why aren't you using simple sensors and the magic of wireless to have continuous monitoring of that? Why is someone having to drive somewhere and incurring that cost? But having IoT and those sensors, measuring, same thing. Like I've been currently working, at a startup where we deal with skyscrapers and managing networks, and we're doing edge computing in buildings, but we're also, the sustainability of buildings. Turns out all the buildings in these big cities could be accounting for anywhere from maybe 20 to 40% of CO2 emissions. Most people spend their time indoors in a building, and heating and air conditioning and lighting, anything that uses energy, you should assume that there's some kind of emission happening as a result of that. And so, and so you measure, you create a baseline, you say, okay, this building is emitting this much CO2. And then you put occupancy sensors or other things to, we've all been in the office where the light turns on when you walk in and it turns off when you leave. Just simple things like that. And so I think there's a lot of ways around simple things like that, simple IoT sensors to turn off the heat or turn down the air conditioning in the summer if there's not people in a certain part of the building, measure the CO2, and then make improvements. I know I read something, I thought it was from the EU just recently about buildings where they're going to start implementing some regulations. Like over the next 10 years, buildings are going to be required to get more and more efficient in their emissions output, or they're going to start being fined, have penalties against the building owners. And so this is kind of like when you talk about regulations for security, it goes from it's a nice thing to do to now the government is saying you have to do this or you're going to be penalized. Same thing with emissions. And the only way people are going to know what emissions they have is they have to measure it. And so I think IoT makes the most sense. It seems obvious but to your other point, how is the IoT device itself sustainable? Because we talk about a lot of waste, e-waste, electronic equipment, depending on how long it lives out there, if it's a short life cycle and then gets thrown in the trash somewhere, that's not good. And so I know we need to, how do we solve for that? Longer living devices. You talk about binding a certificate to hardware and you can't change it. Well, maybe we need to rethink how we do that possibly, because, we need these devices to live as long as possible. I don't know.
No.
Maybe we don't use certificates. Maybe it's got to be something else. Yes. I don't know.
As you know, it's because cybersecurity it's an obstacle, but it's as well a business opportunity in that case.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you stuff I've done in the past, so you can laugh at me. With IoT technology I built, with platforms that I built, where if the customer was not using certificates, they would have some kind of security token, whatever you want to call it. They're passing in a GUID, some kind of unique identifier, At Microsoft in the early days of Azure, we called them SAS tokens, but yeah, it's essentially a universally unique identifier. There's actually another interesting story there about security versus productivity. But I built systems where I would rotate those security keys at some kind of frequency every 10 times. Every time a device connects, I give them a new security key. It's not an X509 certificate, but it's better than nothing. It means that the hacker always has to keep chasing, the way that device authenticates. Its unique identifier for who it is the same, but its security key is changing every single time. And so I didn't use certificates, but I used this other mechanism, which is a simpler way of doing it, that might be more likely to be adopted than putting certificates on devices. A story I may have shared with you before, when I went to Hitachi and we were building this Lumada industrial IoT platform, we also hired another guy, his name is Janesh, and he was a PM, product manager for AWS IoT Core in the early days. And he told me a story about how security was so important to him for that early first version of AWS IoT Core. He had to go to the vice president level and demand that the only way people could use it is if they did X509 certificates. And that VP agreed, and they launched their product with X509 certificates as the only way to connect devices. Across Lake Washington from Amazon is Microsoft with our early days of Azure IoT. And we had this first option of this thing called a SAS token, which is, you can almost think of it as an API key or a little token, just text. And we launched with that. Well, who had greater adoption in the early days? It wasn't even close. Microsoft had dramatically more adoption because it was easier for developers to rapidly build a solution. As soon as you tell a developer that they got to have some kind of PKI system and a bunch of other stuff that they don't understand that makes it cumbersome, it creates friction in getting to market. You know how developers are. They follow the path of least resistance, and they will take shortcuts and do all the wrong things to get the product out the door. And so it was an interesting observation of seeing the more secure platform not doing as well early on, just because it was too hard. You know? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
We got to make it secure while making it easy at the same time and reduce friction. Yeah. The struggle is real.
The struggle is real. Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Well, I think this was fascinating. Again, from both of you. So I want to thank you for this conversation, and wish you all the best with what you're going to do next. Sort of, that's good. So thanks again.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks
Enjoy
for
your
having
breakfast,
me.
Rob.
Yes.
Thank
and
you.
everybody have a wonderful IoT day.
Yes, I also hope that. I also hope
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good seeing you guys.
Yes,
Ciao.
great. Good.